Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dread Report. Tonight, we turn to the Blue Ridge Mountains, a stretch of winding roads, dense forest, and valleys where cell service disappears for miles. 7 separate incidents, 7 road trips that became something else entirely. These cases are drawn from state patrol reports, witness testimonies, and emergency calls logged between 2012 and 2023. The Blue Ridge Parkway sees millions of visitors each year. Most pass through without incident. But there are routes, secondary roads, old logging trails, detours taken during closures, where travelers report encounters that defy easy explanation. Vehicles that follow for miles without passing. Figures standing motionless along guardrails in complete darkness. Voices heard outside locked car doors. From the back roads of Madison County to the outskirts of Asheville, the pattern repeats. Isolation, disorientation, and the sudden realization that something has been watching the entire time. Names and specific locations have been altered to protect those involved. The reports remain filed. The roads remain open. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Dread Report for daily true horror investigations. Not every road leads where you expect it to. Some just lead deeper. Now let us begin. I must have been driving for close to 3 hours when the fog started rolling in. Not the kind that creeps, the kind that drops on you all at once, like someone threw a wet blanket over the whole mountain. I was on Route 421, coming back from my uncle's funeral up in Boone, and I'd taken the long way because I couldn't stand the thought of going home yet. The service had been quick and cold, just like him, and I needed time to let it settle before I walked back into my empty house. The road was mostly mine that night. A few semis had passed going the other direction, their lights cutting through the dark like knives, but otherwise it was just me, and the pines pressing in on both sides. I had the radio on low, some AM station playing old gospel songs, the kind my grandmother used to hum while she canned tomatoes. It was comforting in a distant sort of way, like hearing a voice from another room. That's when I saw her. She was standing maybe 20 feet off the shoulder, right by one of those old mile markers that lean like tombstones. The fog was thick enough that I almost missed her. But my headlights caught her just right. A girl couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, wearing what looked like a pale nightgown. She was barefoot. I noticed that specifically because the ground there is nothing but gravel and broken glass and God knows what else. Her feet should have been torn to ribbons. She didn't wave or call out. She just stood there staring straight ahead, not even looking at me as I passed. Her hair was long and dark, hanging limp around her face, and her skin was so white it almost seemed to glow in the fog. I slowed down instinctively, my foot hovering over the brake, but something stopped me from stopping completely. Something about the way she stood, too still, like a photograph, made my stomach clench. I told myself she was probably just a local kid, maybe ran away from home after a fight with her parents. Kids do stupid things when they're upset. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't sit right. No kid would be out here. Not at midnight. Not in this weather. Not dressed like that. And no kid would just stand there like a statue while a car went by. I kept driving, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, but the fog swallowed her up almost immediately. I couldn't see anything back there except white haze and the faint red glow of my taillights reflecting off the moisture in the air. My hands were gripping the wheel tighter than they needed to, and I realized I was holding my breath. The radio started cutting in and out, that gospel station fading into static and then coming back, the preacher's voice warbling like he was underwater. I reached over to adjust it, but before I could, the GPS on my phone lit up with a notification. Recalculating route, it said in that flat, emotionless voice. I glanced down at it, frowning. I hadn't gone off course. I was still on 421, same as I'd been for the last hour. But the blue line on the screen was spinning, repositioning itself, and then it told me to take a right turn up ahead. I knew for a fact there was no right turn. This stretch was straight as an arrow for another 10 miles at least. I'd driven it 100 times. Recalculating route, it said again, more insistent this time. I ignored it and kept going straight. The fog was getting worse, so thick now that I had to slow down to maybe 30 miles an hour just to see the lines on the road. My high beams were useless. They just lit up the fog like a wall. So I switched them off and relied on the regular headlights, weak as they were. That's when I saw her again. Same girl, same nightgown, same bare feet, same crooked mile marker. I hit the brakes hard enough that my seatbelt locked up against my chest. The car skidded a little on the damp asphalt before coming to a stop, and I sat there staring at her through the windshield, my heart slamming against my ribs. She was maybe 15 feet ahead of me now, standing in the same position as before, arms at her sides, head tilted slightly, eyes looking at nothing. It wasn't possible. I'd passed her 10 minutes ago, maybe more. I'd been driving steady, hadn't turned around, hadn't looped back. There was no way she could be in front of me again unless she'd somehow gotten into a car and driven past me without me noticing. And even then, why would she be standing in the exact same spot? I sat there for what felt like a full minute, engine idling, fog pressing in from all sides. The radio was hissing now, no music, no voice, just a steady white noise that sounded almost like breathing. I reached over and turned it off, and the silence that followed was so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. The girl didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge me at all. I thought about getting out, asking if she needed help, but my hand wouldn't reach for the door handle. Some animal part of my brain was screaming at me not to, and I've learned over the years to trust that voice. So instead, I eased my foot off the brake and started moving again, slow, ready to swerve if she stepped into the road. She didn't. I drove right past her, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her if my window had been down. Her face was blank, no expression at all. And her eyes were open but unfocused, like she was asleep standing up. As I passed, I swear I felt the temperature drop inside the car, cold enough that I could see my breath fog up in front of me. I pressed the gas a little harder, eager to put distance between us, and checked the mirror. She was gone, not walking away, not turning, just gone, swallowed by the fog. My phone buzzed. Recalculating route. I looked down at it, and my blood went cold. The GPS was showing me going in a circle. According to the map, I just completed a perfect loop and was heading back the way I'd come. But I hadn't turned. I knew I hadn't turned. The road had been straight the whole time. I tried to zoom out on the map to get a better sense of where I was, but the screen glitched, the image fracturing into pixelated blocks before resetting. When it came back, the blue dot that represented my car was sitting right on top of that same mile marker. I looked up at the road ahead, and there she was again. This time, I didn't stop. I couldn't. My foot was on the gas, and I was accelerating, doing 40, then 50, then 60. The fog be damned. The speedometer needle climbed, and the engine roared, and the white line on the road blurred beneath me, and I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to look at her as I passed. But I felt her eyes on me, felt that coldness radiating out like she was made of ice, and when I checked the rearview mirror, she was standing in the middle of the road behind me, perfectly centered between the lane lines, getting smaller and smaller as I put distance between us. I didn't slow down for the next 5 miles. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight, and my chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. The fog started to thin out a little, and I could see the trees again, their dark shapes rising up on either side, and I thought maybe I was finally getting clear of whatever that was. Then I noticed the gas gauge. I'd filled up before leaving Boone, right after the funeral. The tank should have been damn near full, but the needle was sitting just above E, the little warning light glowing orange on the dash. I must have said something out loud, cursed or prayed or both, because I heard my own voice in the car, and it sounded strange, too loud and too desperate. I eased off the gas, trying to conserve what little fuel I had left, and started looking for anywhere to pull off. A gas station, a house, even a damn barn would have been better than being stranded out here. But there was nothing, just trees and fog and that endless strip of asphalt that seemed to go nowhere. The radio came back on by itself. Not static this time, but a voice, low and crackling, like it was coming through damaged speakers. At first I thought it was another preacher, but then I realized it wasn't words, not really. It was more like breathing, slow and rhythmic, with a wet, rattling quality that made my skin crawl. I reached over to turn it off again, but the knob wouldn't move. I twisted it hard, then started punching the power button, but nothing worked. The breathing just continued, steady and patient. That's when I saw the mile marker again. I don't know how. I'd been driving straight, watching the road, and I hadn't made any turns. But there it was, leaning at that same crooked angle, and there she was, standing right beside it. This time I did stop, not because I wanted to, but because the car died. The engine cut out all at once, no sputtering or warning, and I coasted to a stop maybe 30 feet from where she stood. I turned the key, pumping the gas, but nothing happened. The dashboard lights flickered once and went dark. I sat there in the sudden silence, the only sound my own breathing and that wet, rattling noise still coming from the radio, even though the car was off. The fog was pressing against the windows now, so thick I could barely see past the hood, and the girl was just a pale shape in the distance, motionless. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been a minute, could have been 10. Time felt wrong, stretched out and compressed at the same time. Eventually, I realized I was going to have to do something, because sitting in a dead car in the middle of nowhere wasn't going to solve anything. I opened the door. The fog rolled in immediately, cold and wet against my face, smelling like earth and rot. The silence outside was even worse than inside the car, absolute, oppressive, like the world was holding its breath. I stepped out onto the asphalt, my legs stiff from sitting so long, and closed the door behind me. The sound of it shutting echoed wrong, like it was bouncing off walls that weren't there. The girl was gone. The mile marker was still there, leaning like always, but she wasn't standing beside it anymore. I turned in a slow circle, trying to see through the fog, but there was nothing. No cars, no lights, no sign of civilization in any direction. Just the road beneath my feet and the trees pressing in and that horrible, suffocating fog. That's when I heard it. A small sound, like fingers tapping on glass. I looked back at my car, and my heart stopped. There was a handprint on the inside of my rear window. Small, child-sized, the fingers splayed out like someone had pressed their palm against the glass. And it was wet, not condensation, but actually wet, dripping slowly down the glass in thin rivulets. I ran back to the car and yanked the back door open, but there was nothing inside, just empty seats and the faint smell of mildew. I checked the front, checked the trunk, checked under the car, but there was no sign of anyone, no sign of anything. But that handprint was still there, glistening in the dim light from my phone's flashlight, and as I stood there staring at it, I realized the fingers were pointing. Back down the road, back the way I'd come, back toward the mile marker. I didn't wait to see what else might happen. I started walking in the opposite direction, leaving the car behind, moving as fast as I could without running. The fog swallowed everything within a few steps, and I lost sight of the car almost immediately, but I kept going, following the white line at the edge of the road because it was the only thing I could see. I walked for what felt like hours. My phone died somewhere along the way, the battery draining from full to nothing in the span of maybe 10 minutes. The fog never lifted. The road never changed. And somewhere behind me, I kept hearing that sound. Small feet on gravel, patient and persistent, never getting closer, but never falling behind. I eventually found a gas station as the sun started to come up, the fog finally burning off in the early light. The attendant said I was 15 miles north of where I should have been, on a service road that didn't connect to anything. He asked if I was feeling all right, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't tell him what happened, didn't tell anyone. What would I say? But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I check my rearview mirror and see fog where there shouldn't be any. And once, just once, I saw a small shape standing by the side of the road, pale and still and patient. I didn't slow down. I haven't driven through Boone since. I'd been driving for close to 6 hours when the fog rolled in thick enough to choke on. This was backwoods Kentucky, somewhere between hazard and nowhere, and I was running on fumes, both literally and the kind that keeps you awake when you shouldn't be behind a wheel. The radio had given up on me about an hour back, dissolving into static that sounded almost like voices if you listen long enough. I didn't listen long. The road was empty. Not just quiet, empty in a way that felt wrong. No deer eyes catching the headlights, no possums flattened on the asphalt, nothing. Just that dense white fog pressing against the windshield like it was trying to get in, and the yellow lines disappearing into it about 10 feet ahead of my bumper. I kept my speed down, white-knuckling the steering wheel, watching the fuel gauge needle hover just above E. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a glow in the trees, soft and amber, like a porch light left on for someone who'd never come home. Then the fog parted just enough, and there it was, a rest stop. Small, maybe 3 or 4 parking spaces out front, a single building that looked like it had been there since the 70s. The kind of place you'd expect to be abandoned, but the lights were on. I almost drove past it. Something in my gut said to keep going. But the fuel light had been glaring at me for the last 15 miles, and I hadn't seen a gas station since I turned off the main highway. I told myself I'd just pull in, use the restroom, maybe splash some water on my face to wake up. 5 minutes, tops. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the lot. My headlights swept across the building, and I could see it was more run down than I'd thought. Paint peeling off in long strips, windows dark with grime. But the lights were definitely on inside. That same amber glow spilling out through the glass door. I parked in the space closest to the entrance, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment. The silence hit me first. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just dead quiet except for the tick-tick-tick of my engine cooling down. I opened the door, and the dome lights seemed too bright, too sudden. When I stepped out, the smell hit me. It was sweet, almost cloying, like fruit that had been left to rot in the sun. But underneath that was something else, something chemical and sharp, like old gasoline or diesel fuel. The combination made my stomach turn. I looked around the lot, but there were no other cars, no signs of life, just my sedan and that building with its sickly lights. I walked toward the entrance, gravel shifting under my feet in a way that sounded too loud. The door was propped open with a concrete block, which struck me as odd. Who props a door open in the middle of the night? But I went in anyway. The inside was exactly what you'd expect from a place like this. Linoleum floor stained and cracked, a few vending machines along one wall humming softly to themselves, and a payphone mounted on the far wall. The phone's receiver was dangling by its cord, swaying slightly like someone had just dropped it. I could hear it beeping, That steady tone you get when a line's been left off the hook too long. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting everything in that greenish amber light that makes skin look sickly. There was a hallway to my right with two doors, one marked men and one marked women, both in that faded lettering that's been there so long the paint started to peel away from the metal. I stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The vending machines were old, really old, the kind with the pull knobs instead of buttons. Through their scratched plastic fronts, I could see candy bars I didn't recognize, soda brands I'd never heard of. One of them had a handwritten sign taped to it that said, "Out of order," in shaky ballpoint pen. The payphone kept beeping. I walked over to it, thinking, maybe I should hang it up, stop that noise. But when I got close, I saw that the cord had been cut, not torn, but cut cleanly, like someone had taken scissors to it. The receiver was just dangling there, dead weight, but that beeping kept going. I reached out to touch it, and my hand stopped about an inch away. The sound wasn't coming from the phone at all. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere deeper in the building, just echoing off the tiles to make it sound like it was the phone. I pulled my hand back. The smell was stronger inside, that sweet rot smell mixing with old cigarette smoke and something underneath it all that reminded me of a butcher shop, copper and iron and meat left out too long. I thought about leaving, getting back in my car, taking my chances with the fuel situation. But I'd already driven past the point of no return. The next town was at least 30 miles, and I wouldn't make it on what I had left. I headed for the men's room instead. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and the smell hit me like a wall. It wasn't just the usual rest stop bathroom stench. This was something worse, something organic and wrong. The light inside was dimmer, just a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, swaying slightly even though there was no breeze. 2 stalls, 2 urinals, a sink with a mirror above it, so dirty I could barely see my reflection. I did what I needed to do quickly, not touching anything I didn't have to. The whole time, I kept thinking about that payphone, that beeping that wasn't coming from where it should be. When I went to wash my hands, the water that came out was rust-colored at first, then cleared to something that looked like water, but felt too cold, too slick. I looked up at the mirror and froze. There was something written in the grime. Not words exactly, but marks, deliberate, careful marks, like someone had dragged their finger through years of accumulated dirt to leave a message. The shapes didn't make sense to me, didn't look like any language I knew, but looking at them made my head hurt in a way that felt deep, behind my eyes. I dried my hands on my jeans and got out of there. The main room felt different when I came back. The vending machines had gone silent. Not just quiet, completely silent. No humming, no internal machinery sounds. The lights had dimmed too, that amber glow now weak and watery, like it was coming from somewhere far away instead of the fixtures right above me. Through the front windows, I could see my car's headlights, and they were flickering. On and off, in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. And there was something standing behind the wheel. I couldn't see it clearly through the dirty glass and the flickering lights, but there was definitely something in the driver's seat. A shape, dark and hunched, too tall to be sitting comfortably. It wasn't moving, just sitting there with what might have been hands on the steering wheel. My heart kicked into overdrive. I started toward the door, walking fast but not running. Some animal part of my brain said not to run, not to show fear. But the closer I got to the exit, the more wrong everything felt. The distance seemed to stretch, like I was walking on a treadmill, getting nowhere. The beeping got louder, more insistent, coming from all around me now instead of just one direction. I broke into a run. I hit the door hard enough to rattle it in its frame, burst out into the night air, And the smell hit me again. That sweet rot, but stronger now, overwhelming. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys, not looking at whatever was in the driver's seat, because if I looked at it, I'd have to acknowledge it was real. I got the door open and threw myself inside, and the seat was empty. No one there, never had been. But it was warm, body warm, and there was an impression in the fabric like someone had just stood up. The steering wheel had a residue on it, something dark and sticky that my hands had already touched before I realized what I was doing. I started the engine, thank God it turned over, and threw it in reverse, tires spitting gravel. I cranked the wheel, shifted to drive, and punched the accelerator. The rest stop disappeared in my rearview mirror almost immediately, swallowed up by fog and darkness. But I kept my foot down, kept driving. Didn't let myself look back again. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. That sticky residue was still on my palms, and when I glanced down at it in the dashboard light, it looked like sap, dark amber tree sap, but it smelled like copper. I drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The fog started to thin, then suddenly cleared completely, and I was in an open field. Not a road anymore, just a field. Tall grass on either side, my headlights cutting through nothing but empty air and the occasional fence post. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop. My headlights illuminated grass and more grass, and in the distance, maybe a farmhouse or a barn, but no road, no pavement, no rest stop. I looked around wildly, trying to understand where I was, how I'd gotten here. That's when I saw it. About 20 yards ahead, there was a tree, old and gnarled, branches reaching up like arthritic fingers. And hanging from one of those branches, swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel, was a payphone receiver. Just the receiver, dangling by its spiral cord, exactly like the one in the rest stop. I sat there staring at it, engine running, hands still gripping the wheel. The receiver was beeping. I could hear it even from inside the car with the windows up. That same steady tone, on and off, on and off. I put the car in drive and went around it, drove perpendicular across the field until I hit a dirt road, then followed that until it connected with a paved highway. I didn't look back, didn't stop again until I saw the lights of a town, a real town, with gas stations and late-night diners and people. When I finally pulled into a gas station, the sun was just starting to come up. The attendant looked at me funny when I came inside to pay, and I caught my reflection in the security mirror behind the counter. I looked like I'd aged 10 years in one night. There was still that residue on my hands, dark and sticky, and when the attendant asked if I was okay, I couldn't answer. I filled up my tank and got back on the road. Made it home by noon, didn't tell anyone what happened. What would I say? That I stopped at a rest stop that disappeared? That I saw something in my car that wasn't there? But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep, I hear it. That beeping, faint and far away, like a phone that's been left off the hook. And I wonder if I ever really left that rest stop at all, or if I'm still there, walking toward a door that keeps getting farther away, while something sits in my car and waits. I found the map in a shoebox at the back of my grandfather's closet 3 weeks after we buried him. It wasn't with the other estate papers, the deed to his property, the will, the photographs. This was tucked away like he didn't want anyone finding it, wrapped in oilcloth that smelled like tobacco and something sour I couldn't place. The paper was old, hand-drawn in pencil, with annotations in his shaky handwriting. Most of it marked trails I recognized from childhood visits, places he'd taken me hunting or fishing. But there was one route I'd never seen before, cutting through what he'd labeled Old Nichols Logging Road and crossing something he'd simply called the bridge. Next to it, in letters so faint I almost missed them, he'd written, "Don't go back." I should have listened. My grandfather wasn't the type to write cryptic warnings. He was practical, direct, the kind of man who said what he meant and meant what he said. So those 3 words bothered me more than I wanted to admit. But I'd also just lost my job. My girlfriend had moved out 2 months prior, and I was staying in his empty house trying to figure out what came next. I needed something to do, some way to feel connected to him again. The map seemed like an answer, even if I didn't know what question I was asking. The Nichols logging road wasn't on any GPS. I had to drive 30 miles out from town, past the last gas station, past the last church, past the last place where the county bothered to patch the asphalt. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to 2 faint ruts in the undergrowth where grass grew tall between the tracks. My truck bounced over exposed roots and rocks, branches scraping both sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. The forest here was different than closer to town. Older, denser, with trees so thick their canopy blocked out most of the afternoon sun. Everything had a greenish, underwater quality to it, like I was driving through the bottom of a lake. I'd been on the logging road for maybe 40 minutes when I saw the bridge. It appeared suddenly through a break in the trees, spanning a gorge I hadn't even known was there. The bridge was steel, the old kind with a lattice of rust-orange girders forming a tunnel overhead. It looked like something from the 1930s or 40s, built when men still died regularly in construction accidents and nobody thought twice about it. The metal was pitted and weathered, streaked with rust and bird droppings, but it seemed solid enough. The gorge below was maybe 60 feet deep, choked with laurel and rhododendrons so thick I couldn't see the bottom. I stopped the truck and got out, stretching my legs. The air smelled like wet leaves and iron. I could hear water running somewhere far below, a sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. There were no signs, no warnings about weight limits or structural integrity. Just the bridge stretching ahead into the trees on the far side. According to the map, the bridge was maybe a quarter mile long, nothing unusual. I got back in the truck, turned on my headlights even though it was still afternoon, and started across. The steel grating under my tires made a rhythmic thrumming sound, a deep metallic hum that I felt in my chest as much as heard. The girders overhead created a tunnel effect, shadows and light alternating in hypnotic patterns. I kept my speed steady, maybe 20 miles an hour, watching the far side of the bridge approach through the windshield. My radio was playing classic rock, the same station I'd been listening to all day, but as I got maybe 50 yards onto the bridge, it started to fade into static. I reached over to change the station, and that's when I realized something was wrong. The bridge wasn't getting any shorter. I'd been driving for what felt like a minute, maybe 2, and the far side looked exactly as distant as when I'd started. I checked my speedometer, still 20 miles per hour. I looked in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the entrance behind me receding into the distance. Instead, I saw only more bridge, stretching back into a bank of fog that I didn't remember being there before. My chest tightened. I pressed the gas pedal harder, bringing my speed up to 30, then 40. The thrumming of the tires on the steel grating grew louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat. The trees on either side blurred past, or at least I thought they were moving. It was hard to tell. Everything looked the same rust-streaked girders, the same shadows, the same fog creeping in at the edges of my vision. The radio hissed and popped, and then I heard something that made my hands clench the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. Whispers. They were faint at first, buried under the static, but as I listened they grew clearer. Multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in tones too low to make out individual words. They didn't sound like radio interference or crosstalk from another station. They sounded deliberate, like people talking just beyond a wall. their conversation muffled but unmistakably present. I punched the radio off. The whispers continued. They were coming from outside the truck now, carried on air that shouldn't have been moving. The windows were closed, but I could hear them clearly, echoing off the girders overhead and the gorge below. I slowed down, my pulse hammering in my ears, and looked at my GPS mounted on the dashboard. The screen showed my truck icon in the middle of a blank space, the little blue dot motionless while the circle spun and spun beneath it. Then text appeared. Recalculating route. The screen refreshed. Recalculating route. Again. Recalculating route. I've driven through dead zones before, places where GPS signals can't penetrate. But this was different. The device wasn't losing signal. It was confused, like it couldn't understand where I was or how to process the data it was receiving. I tried my phone. No service. Not even a single bar. The fog was thicker now, pressing against the truck like something solid. I could barely see 20 feet ahead, just enough to keep the truck centered on the bridge. The whispers had settled into a rhythm, rising and falling like breathing, and underneath them I heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps keeping pace with my truck. I looked to my left, toward the guardrail. Through the fog I could see the railing itself, a line of rusted steel posts connected by cables. Beyond it, nothing but gray. The footsteps came from that direction, matching my speed exactly. When I accelerated, they sped up. When I slowed, they slowed. But I couldn't see what was making them. My grandfather's words came back to me. Don't go back. I realized he hadn't meant don't return to the bridge. He'd meant don't turn around while you're on it. Too late now. I cranked the steering wheel hard, intending to make a U-turn and head back the way I'd come. The truck skidded on the damp steel, fishtailing before I got it under control and facing the opposite direction. I floored the gas pedal, the engine roaring, tires squealing. The bridge stretched ahead, identical to the direction I'd just come from. Same fog, same girders, same endless perspective vanishing into gray nothing. I drove faster, the speedometer climbing to 50, then 60. The thrumming of the tires became a scream. The girders overhead blurred into a solid tunnel of rust and shadow. And still the bridge went on. I passed rivets I swore I'd seen before, patches of rust in familiar patterns, a bird's nest wedged in a corner of the framework that I knew I'd already driven past. That's when I saw the tire marks. They were fresh, still wet on the damp steel. 2 parallel tracks that matched my tires exactly, right down to the tread pattern. I was following my own path, looping back on myself in a way that should have been impossible. The bridge was straight. I could see that with my own eyes. But somehow I was traveling in a circle, passing the same points over and over. The footsteps were still there, still matching my speed, but now they were on both sides of the truck. Multiple sets, moving in perfect synchronization. I couldn't bring myself to look anymore. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, on the endless gray corridor of fog and metal, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The whispers had formed words now. I didn't want to understand them, but I couldn't help it. They were saying my name. Over and over, my full name spoken in voices that sounded like my grandfather, my father, people I'd known who were dead. They called to me gently, the way you'd call to someone lost in the woods, trying to guide them home. Something scraped along the passenger side of the truck, a long metallic shriek that made my teeth ache. I risked a glance to my right and saw a hand, gray, impossibly long fingers pressed against the window, dragging along the glass. There was no arm attached to it, just the hand, keeping pace as I hit 70 miles per hour. I screamed. I'm not proud of it, but I screamed like a child, raw and terrified, and mashed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck rocketed forward, the hand falling away behind me. The speedometer hit 80, 90, the whole vehicle shaking, the steel bridge blurring into a tunnel of sound and motion. And then, like passing through a membrane, everything changed. The fog vanished. The girders overhead ended. I was on the other side of the bridge, my truck skidding on dirt and gravel as I slammed on the brakes. I came to a stop maybe 30 feet past the far end of the bridge, my engine ticking in the sudden silence, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I sat there for a long time, shaking, before I could force myself to look back. The bridge was there, exactly as it should have been. A quarter-mile of old steel spanning a gorge, ordinary and abandoned, rusting quietly in the afternoon light. The fog was gone. The sky was clear. I could see birds wheeling overhead and hear the wind moving through the trees. My clock said 5:47 p.m. When I'd entered the bridge, it had been 2:15. I'd lost 3.5 hours. I drove the rest of the logging road in a daze, barely seeing the trees or the ruts or the way the path eventually widened and joined a paved county road I recognized. I made it back to my grandfather's house just as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold that seemed too beautiful for what I'd just experienced. It took me 2 days to work up the nerve to look at the map again. When I finally unfolded it, I found something I'd missed before. In the margin next to the bridge, my grandfather had written a date, October 3rd, 1967. Below it, in letters so small, I had to use a magnifying glass to read them. Bobby didn't make it out. I did. Never went back. I looked up Bobby in my grandfather's old papers. Robert James, his younger brother. Died in 1967 at age 19. The death certificate listed the cause as accidental drowning in Nichols Creek. There is no Nichols Creek on any map. But there is a gorge under the bridge, and somewhere at the bottom, where the laurel grows so thick you can't see the ground, water runs over rocks that have never seen daylight. I burned the map that night, watching the paper curl and blacken in the fireplace, but I still have the oilcloth it was wrapped in. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I take it out and smell it. Tobacco and something sour, something like rust and fog and old steel. And sometimes I hear whispers coming from inside the cloth, faint and insistent. They know my name. They're still calling. I was somewhere outside Asheville when the check engine light came on. Not the gentle amber glow that tells you to get it looked at when you can. This was the bright red kind, the kind that means pull over now. I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, coming back from a job interview in Knoxville that I knew I'd bombed the second I walked out. The kind of interview where you can see it in their eyes, that polite distance, that look that says they've already moved on to the next resume before you've even left the building. The engine made a sound like grinding metal, then just quit. No sputtering, no gasping, just silence except for the hiss of steam rising from under the hood. I coasted onto the shoulder and sat there for a minute, watching the steam curl up into the twilight. My phone had 1 bar of service, flickering in and out like it couldn't decide whether to help me or not. I tried calling a tow service, but the call dropped 3 times before I gave up. The road stretched empty in both directions, hemmed in by dense pine and oak that seemed to lean over the asphalt like they were trying to reclaim it. I hadn't passed a town in maybe 20 miles, hadn't seen another car in at least 10. The sun was sinking fast behind the mountains, turning everything that particular shade of orange-purple that makes the Appalachian ridges look like they're on fire. I grabbed my wallet and my duffel bag and started walking. It was maybe 2 miles before I saw the motel, though it felt longer in the growing dark. The building materialized out of the gloom like something that had been waiting there all along. A squat, single-story structure with peeling white paint and a flat roof that sagged in the middle. The sign out front buzzed and flickered, the neon tube spelling out vacancy in letters that looked like they hadn't been changed since the 70s. Below that, smaller letters that might have once spelled out a name, but whatever it had been was long gone, leaving only rust stains and empty bolt holes. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through, but there were 3 cars there. A Buick that looked older than me, a pickup truck with a bed full of tarps, and a sedan with Tennessee plates. So at least I wasn't the only person who'd ended up here. The office door stuck when I pushed it, then gave with a sound like it was exhaling. Inside, it smelled like cigarettes and pine cleaner, that particular combination that tells you someone's trying to cover up something worse. The walls were paneled in dark wood, and a single lamp on the desk cast more shadows than light. Behind the desk sat a man who didn't look up when I came in. He was maybe 60, maybe older, the kind of weathered you get from mountain living, skin like tanned leather, and hands that looked like they'd spent decades working outside. He had gray hair slicked back from his forehead and eyes that stayed fixed on whatever he was reading, some kind of ledger book with yellowed pages. "I need a room," I said. He still didn't look up. Just reached under the desk and pulled out a key on a plastic fob, green plastic that had been chewed or worried at the edges. The number 6 was stamped into the metal of the key itself. "How much?" I asked. He pushed the key across the desk toward me. Still hadn't looked up, still hadn't spoken. I pulled out my wallet and put down 2 20s, which seemed like more than enough for a place like this. He didn't touch the money, didn't acknowledge it. Just kept his eyes on that ledger, his finger tracing down a column of numbers or names or whatever was written there in faded ink. "Checkout's at 10, he said finally, his voice rough and quiet, like it wasn't used often. I took the key and left. Room 6 was at the end of the building, the last door before the woods took over completely. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it back and forth before something inside gave and the door swung open. The room was cleaner than I expected. The bed was made with tight hospital corners, white sheets tucked in so perfectly they looked like they'd never been slept in. The carpet was that industrial brown that hides stains, recently vacuumed from the look of the lines still visible in the pile. There was a dresser with a mirror, a nightstand with a lamp, and a television that was definitely from the 90s, the kind with the big boxy back. But it was the other door that caught my attention. On the far wall, next to the bathroom, there was another door, the kind that connects adjoining rooms in motels, so families can rent 2 rooms but still move between them. This one was painted green. Not forest green or sage or any of the normal colors you'd expect. This was something else, a shade that was almost yellow in places, almost gray in others, like the paint had been mixed wrong or had changed over time. It looked wet somehow, though when I got closer, I could see it was dry, just had that kind of sheen to it. I tried the handle. Locked from the other side. I thought about asking for a different room, but the idea of going back to that office, to that clerk who wouldn't look at me, who'd barely spoken, I just didn't want to deal with it. Besides, it was just a door. Every motel room had them. I threw my duffel on the bed and went to take a shower. The water pressure was better than I expected, and the bathroom was as clean as the rest of the room, almost aggressively clean, like someone had scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. I stood under the hot water until my skin turned pink, trying to wash away the stress of the day, the failed interview, the dead car, the strangeness of this place. When I came out, toweling off my hair, I noticed how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind. The kind where you start to notice the absence of sound, where you realize you should be hearing something, anything, and you're not. No traffic noise from the road, no television sounds from other rooms, no voices, no footsteps, no air conditioning hum. Just silence pressing in from all sides. I turned on the TV hoping for noise, for company, but all I got was static on most channels and a fuzzy religious program on one of the others. I left it on anyway, the preacher's voice crackling in and out, talking about wilderness and temptation and being led astray. I was lying on the bed, trying to decide whether to just sleep in my clothes or dig through my duffel for something clean, when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing from the other side of the green door. I sat up, listening. It was definitely breathing, the kind you can hear through walls or doors when everything else is quiet enough. In and out, measured and rhythmic. Someone was in the next room, and they were very close to the door, maybe standing right against it. "Hello?" I called out. The breathing continued. In and out. In and out. I got up and went to the door, pressing my ear against the green paint. It felt cold, colder than it should have been, and the texture was strange, smooth but somehow wrong, like touching something that had been underwater too long. The breathing was clearer now. I could hear it distinctly, each inhale and exhale deliberate and slow. But there was something else too. A smell, faint but getting stronger. Damp earth, rotting leaves, something organic breaking down. "Hey," I said, louder this time. "Can you hear me?" The breathing stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy steps pacing back and forth on the other side of the door. Back and forth, maybe 5 steps in each direction before turning. The floorboards creaked with each step, a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. I don't know how long I stood there listening. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been an hour. The pacing never stopped, never varied its rhythm. Whoever was over there just kept walking back and forth, like they were trapped in some kind of loop. Finally, I knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps that sounded too loud in the quiet room. The footsteps stopped immediately. I waited, my knuckles still against the green paint, feeling my heart beating too fast in my chest. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no sound at all. "I can hear you," I said to the door, to whoever was on the other side. "I know you're there." Still nothing. I went back to the bed and tried to sleep, but every time I started to drift off, I'd hear it again. The breathing, the pacing, always stopping when I acknowledged it, then starting up again a few minutes later. I turned up the TV, but I could still hear it underneath, that steady rhythm of breath and footsteps. I put a pillow over my head, but the sound seemed to come from inside the walls, inside the room itself. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I must have finally fallen asleep, because I woke up with daylight coming through the thin curtains and the TV still crackling with static. The room was silent now. No breathing, no footsteps. Just morning sounds. Birds outside, a car door slamming somewhere in the parking lot. Normal things. I got up and looked at the green door. In daylight, it looked even stranger, that not quite right color seeming to shift depending on how the light hit it. I tried the handle again, knowing it would be locked, but feeling compelled to check anyway. It didn't turn. I packed up my stuff quickly, suddenly wanting to be out of this room, out of this motel. My car was still dead 2 miles up the road, but I'd figure something out. Call that tow truck again, hitch a ride to the nearest town. Anything but spend another minute in this place. But when I went to open the door to leave, I stopped. The green door was gone. Not open, not damaged, just gone. Where it had been was now just wall, the same dark wood paneling as the rest of the room, the same aged texture. I put my hand against it, and it was solid, real. No seam, no indication there had ever been a door there at all. I looked around the room like I'd somehow gotten turned around, like maybe I was looking at the wrong wall. But no, there was the bed I'd slept in. There was the TV still showing static. There was the bathroom door. This was definitely where the green door had been. I grabbed my duffel and left, practically running to the office. The same clerk was behind the desk, in the same position, looking at the same ledger. Like he'd never moved. Like he'd been sitting there all night. "I need to check out," I said, putting the key on the desk. He looked up for the first time. His eyes were pale blue, watery, and they fixed on me with an expression I couldn't read. "Did you see her again?" he asked softly. The question hit me like cold water. "What?" He didn't repeat it, just reached across the desk and took my hand, turning it palm up. His fingers were dry and cold, and he traced one along the underside of my fingernails. I looked down and saw it. Green paint. That same not quite right green from the door, crusted under my fingernails in thin crescents. Both hands, like I'd been clawing at something, scratching at something while I slept. I jerked my hand back, but the clerk had already let go. He was looking at his ledger again, running his finger down that column of faded writing. "Room's clean," he said. "You can go." I walked out into the bright morning, into the parking lot where my feet crunched on broken asphalt and weeds. The 3 cars were still there, the Buick, the pickup, the sedan, but they looked like they'd been there longer than one night. The Buick's tires were flat. The pickup had a layer of pollen on the windshield that looked weeks old. The sedan had a parking ticket under the wiper blade, faded and water-stained. I walked back to the road and kept walking, even when my shoulders started to ache from the duffel bag, even when my feet started to blister in my shoes. I walked until I saw a gas station, until I saw people, until I was somewhere that felt real again. The tow truck driver who finally picked me up asked me where I'd spent the night. And I told him. He got quiet, then said he didn't know any motel in that area. Said the last one had closed down in the 90s after some trouble, had been standing empty ever since. I didn't argue with him. That was 3 months ago. The green paint is gone from under my nails now, though it took weeks of scrubbing, weeks of watching it slowly fade. But sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I can still hear it. That slow, steady breathing, that sound of footsteps pacing back and forth. And I wonder about that clerk's question, the one I never answered. Did I see her again? I don't know. I don't know who she was, or what she wanted, or why there was a door that shouldn't have been there. I don't know why it was painted that particular shade of green, or why it disappeared, or what I was doing to get that paint under my nails while I slept. But sometimes I look at my hands, and I swear I can still see traces of it, that color that isn't quite right, that color that looks wet even when it's dry. And I wonder if it's really gone, or if it's just waiting. If that door is still there somewhere, in some version of that room, and if someone else is lying awake right now, listening to breathing on the other side, listening to footsteps that never stop pacing, waiting for morning, not knowing that morning might not matter at all. I found Briar Hollow on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, hunched over my grandfather's road atlas in the cramped kitchen of his farmhouse outside Pikeville. The atlas was from 1987, its pages yellowed and soft as cloth from decades of folding and unfolding. My finger had been tracing old logging routes through eastern Kentucky when I saw it. Briar Hollow, marked with a small dot and the number 312 beside it. Population 312. A real town, not just a crossroads or a post office. I called Mason first, then Dakota. We'd been friends since high school, bound together by our shared love of exploring forgotten places. Old factories, abandoned churches, that sort of thing. We'd drive for hours on weekends, cameras in hand, looking for what Mason called American decay. But this was different. This wasn't a dead place we were chasing. This was a living town that had somehow been erased from the modern world. We left on Friday morning, Mason's Jeep packed with camping gear we probably wouldn't need. Dakota riding shotgun with her phone out, already trying to find Briar Hollow on Google Maps. Nothing came up. She tried Apple Maps, then some hiking app she'd downloaded. Still nothing. The more she searched, the more excited we became. A whole town just gone from the digital record. It felt like discovering buried treasure. The drive took us deeper into the mountains than I'd ever been, following routes that my grandfather's atlas showed, but that seemed to exist in a state of barely their reality. The pavement would give way to gravel, then back to cracked asphalt, then to something that might have been a road once, but was now mostly dirt and exposed rock. The trees grew taller and closer the farther we went, their branches forming a canopy so thick that the morning light turned green and submarine. Around noon, we found it. Or rather, the road simply opened up, and there it was. Spread across a narrow valley like something out of a postcard from 50 years ago. Briar Hollow. The sign at the town line was wooden, hand-painted, the letters still legible. Briar Hollow, Pop 312, founded 1889. Mason pulled over and we all got out, staring down at the town below us. It looked perfect. Too perfect. The houses were painted in soft pastels, pale yellows, light blues, mint greens, their shutters straight and their lawns neatly trimmed. A white church steeple rose from the town center, and I could see a main street with what looked like shops, a post office, maybe a diner. From our vantage point on the hillside, it looked like a movie set, like someone had built an idealized version of small-town America and then just walked away. But something was wrong. It took me a moment to identify what it was. And then Dakota said it aloud. "Why is it so quiet?" She was right. We were looking down at a town of 300 people in the middle of a Friday afternoon, and there was no movement. No cars on the streets, no people walking, no dogs barking. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees behind us and the ticking of Mason's cooling engine. "Maybe everyone's at work," Mason offered, but his voice was uncertain. We drove down into the valley, the road switchbacking through the trees until it deposited us onto Main Street. Up close, the wrongness became more apparent. The buildings were immaculate, their paint jobs fresh enough that I could smell it faintly through the open windows, that sharp chemical scent of recent work. The sidewalks were swept clean, the street signs were polished, but every single window was dark. Not just curtained or shuttered, dark in a way that suggested emptiness beyond. The kind of darkness you see in buildings that have never been lived in, where no one has ever switched on a light or hung a picture or left a coffee mug on a counter. Mason parked in front of what appeared to be a general store. Through the spotless window, I could see shelves stocked with canned goods, a refrigerator case humming quietly, even a display of local honey near the register. But no clerk, no customers, no little bell above the door that would jingle when we entered, because we didn't enter. None of us wanted to be the first to try a door. We walked down Main Street instead, our footsteps echoing off the building facades. Dakota tried her phone again. No signal, which wasn't surprising given how deep in the mountains we were. But it was more than that. Her phone's clock had stopped, frozen at 11:47 a.m., so had Mason's, so had mine. All of our phones, dead at the same moment, though the batteries showed full charge. "That's not normal," Dakota said, which was maybe the most obvious thing anyone had ever said, but I understood. We needed to say things aloud, to confirm to each other that we were all seeing the same impossibilities. The church sat at the end of Main Street, traditional white clapboard with that tall steeple we'd seen from above. As we approached it, I noticed the lack of a bell in the tower. The opening was there, the wooden frame clearly designed to house a bell, but the space was empty. Just blue sky visible through the gap. That's when the bell rang. a single clear tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the valley with a purity that made my teeth ache. We all froze, looking up at the empty bell tower, then at each other. The sound faded slowly, taking maybe 30 seconds to die away completely, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. "Noon," Mason whispered, though our phone still said 11:47. We should have left then. That's what I think about now, lying awake at night. We should have gotten back in the Jeep and driven up that switchback road and never looked back. But we didn't. Because we were young and stupid and fascinated, and because some part of us couldn't quite believe that anything truly bad could happen in a place that looked so much like a Norman Rockwell painting. We explored for hours. We looked in windows, shops full of merchandise, a diner with place settings on every table, a barber shop with magazines dated from this year fanned across a waiting bench. We found a post office with letters sorted into boxes, each envelope addressed to residents of Briar Hollow, names like Miller and Hutchins and Carver. We found a school with children's artwork pinned to corkboards in the hallway, visible through the glass doors. Crayon drawings of houses and families and smiling suns. But we never saw a single living person. As the afternoon wore on, we began to notice other details. The flowers in the window boxes were real, not plastic, and they weren't wilted. Someone had watered them recently. The grass in the yards was freshly cut. I could see the mower lines in some of them, perfect diagonal stripes. In one yard, a sprinkler was running, the water making rainbows in the slanting sunlight. "Maybe it's a government thing," Dakota suggested. "Like witness protection for a whole town, or some kind of social experiment." But that didn't explain the phones, or the phantom bell, or the feeling that was growing in my chest, a pressure that made it hard to breathe, like the air itself was pressing down on us. We ended up back at the church as dusk began to settle over the valley. The sky had turned that particular shade of deep blue that comes just before darkness, and the first stars were appearing overhead. Mason was arguing that we should stay overnight, that we'd come all this way, and we should at least document the place properly. Dakota was arguing the opposite, her voice tight with an anxiety I shared. I was the tiebreaker, and I was about to side with Dakota when the lights came on. All at once, every house in Briar Hollow flickered to life. Porch lights, window lights, street lamps, the entire town illuminated in a single instant. We stood frozen in front of the church, watching as the darkness filled with warm yellow light, the kind that promises safety and comfort and home. And then we saw the figures. They appeared in the windows, silhouettes backlit by the indoor lights. Human-shaped, but somehow wrong, their proportions just slightly off in ways I couldn't articulate. Too tall, maybe, or too thin, or moving in a way that didn't quite match how people move. They stood in living rooms and kitchens, behind lace curtains and Venetian blinds, and they were completely still, just standing there, facing outward, toward us. "We need to go," Dakota said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right now. We need to go right now." We ran. Not back toward Main Street where we'd left the Jeep, but away from those watching figures, our feet pounding on the pavement, our breath coming in ragged gasps. We ran past the perfect houses with their perfect lawns and their impossible occupants, ran until we reached the edge of town where the pavement gave way to dirt and the forest began again. That's when we realized the road was gone. Not just hard to see in the growing darkness. Gone. The switchback we'd driven down that morning had simply ceased to exist. In its place was unbroken forest, trees that looked like they'd been growing there for centuries, their trunks thick and their roots deep. We crashed into the underbrush, desperately searching for any sign of the road, but there was nothing. It was as if it had never existed. Behind us, the church bell began to ring again. Not once, like at noon, but over and over, a frantic clanging that couldn't be coming from the empty bell tower, but was, somehow, impossibly was. With each ring, the temperature seemed to drop, my breath beginning to mist in the air, despite it being October, not January. We turned back toward town, because where else could we go? The forest was impenetrable, and at least the town had light, had buildings, had the Jeep somewhere on Main Street. We stumbled back through the dark yards, and I realized that the figures in the windows were gone. The lights were still on, warm and inviting through the glass, but the silhouettes had vanished. "The church," Mason gasped. "Look at the church." The doors stood open, two rectangles of absolute blackness in the white facade. No light spilled out from inside, despite every other building being lit. And from that darkness came a sound, humming, like a hymn, but with no melody I recognized. It wasn't quite music and wasn't quite human, a droning that rose and fell in patterns that hurt to follow. We didn't discuss it. We just ran for Main Street, our only thought to find the Jeep and ram through whatever we had to in order to escape. But as we rounded the corner onto Main Street, we saw that every building was open now. Doors and windows gaped wide, and from each opening came that same humming, overlapping and echoing off itself until it sounded like 1,000 voices singing in unison. The Jeep was where we'd left it, sitting alone in front of the general store. We sprinted for it, Mason fumbling with his keys, Dakota and I throwing ourselves into the back seat. The engine turned over on the first try. Thank God, thank God, thank God, and Mason threw it into reverse, the tires squealing as he backed up and spun around. That's when we saw them coming out of the buildings. Not the figures from the windows, but something else. People, if you could call them that. They moved in the wrong way, their joints bending at angles that weren't quite right, their faces tilted up toward us with expressions that might have been curiosity or hunger or something I don't have words for. They came slowly, emerging from every open door, their numbers growing with each second. Mason floored it, and the Jeep surged forward, headed for the edge of town and the vanished road. Behind us, the humming grew louder, more insistent, and I made the mistake of looking back. The people, the things, were following, not running but moving with a horrible purpose, and beyond them, the church remained, its open doors like a mouth waiting to swallow us whole. We hit the edge of town at 60 miles an hour, the Jeep bouncing violently as Mason drove straight into the forest where the road should have been. Branches scraped the sides, the windshield spiderwebbing as we smashed through underbrush, and then suddenly, impossibly, we were on pavement again. The real road, the one we'd driven down that morning, solid and actual beneath our tires. Mason didn't slow down until we'd put 20 miles between us and that valley, didn't stop until we reached an all-night truck stop just over the county line. We sat in the parking lot under the harsh fluorescent lights, shaking, none of us able to speak. Our phones had come back to life somewhere along that desperate drive, their clocks jumping forward to match real time. Hours lost that none of us could account for. We tried to go back 2 days later, in daylight, with a state trooper we'd finally convinced to escort us. But we couldn't find it. The turnoff wasn't there. The valley wasn't there. According to the GPS, we were driving through an unbroken stretch of national forest, and according to the trooper's very old map, older even than my grandfather's atlas, there had never been a town called Briar Hollow anywhere in that part of Kentucky. But I know what we saw. I know what we heard. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about those figures in the windows. How they were waiting for full dark. How the town came alive only after the sun went down. How the church doors opened like an invitation, or a warning, or something worse. I think about population 312, and I wonder if that number ever changes. If 3 more would make it 315, if that's why the road disappeared, not to trap us, but to protect us from accepting whatever invitation Briar Hollow was offering. And I think about that hymn, that droning hum that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite human. Sometimes, in that space between waking and sleeping, I can still hear it. I can still hear them singing, calling out across the mountains, waiting in their perfect town with their perfect houses for the next travelers to find them in an old atlas and come looking for something that should have stayed lost. Mason doesn't talk about it. Dakota moved to Colorado last year. My grandfather's atlas is in a drawer somewhere, and I haven't opened it since. But on quiet nights, when the wind moves through the trees just right, I swear I can hear a church bell ringing in the distance, even though there's no church for miles. A single clear tone, calling out across the darkness, marking an hour that doesn't exist in a place that shouldn't be. And I know, with a certainty that sits cold in my gut, that Briar Hollow is still out there, still waiting, still singing its strange hymn to an empty valley, still counting to 312, and hoping, always hoping, for just a few more. I still don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Not after that night. Not after what happened on Route 219, just past the old Greenbrier turnoff where the mountains press in so close you can barely see the stars. It was late November, maybe 3 years back now. I'd been working a double shift at the lumber mill over in Marlinton. And I was bone tired in that way where your eyes feel like they're full of sand and your whole body just aches for your bed. The roads up there, they're not like regular roads. They twist and coil like a copperhead, hugging the mountainside so tight that one wrong move and you're tumbling down into darkness that goes on forever. I'd driven them my whole life, though. Knew every curve, every pothole, every place where the fog liked to settle thick as wool. The heater in my truck was blasting, fighting against the cold that seeped in through the old weather stripping. Temperature had dropped hard that evening, one of those sudden mountain freezes that comes out of nowhere and turns everything brittle. My breath wasn't even fogging up the windshield yet, but I could feel it in my bones. Winter was coming early. I was maybe 40 minutes from home when I came around that blind curve just past Cheat Mountain. You know the one, where the road bends so sharp you have to slow down to almost nothing, and there's that little pull-off where the kids used to park back in high school. My headlights swept across the gravel shoulder, and that's when I saw him. He was just standing there, perfectly still, like he'd been waiting. A man, maybe in his 40s or 50s, hard to tell in the dark. He wore a flannel jacket, reddish-brown, and his arm was out with his thumb up. Not waving it around or nothing, just holding it there. Patient. His face was in shadow, but I could see he was looking right at me, right through my windshield, into my eyes. I should have kept going. God knows I should have. My daddy always told me never to pick up strangers on these mountain roads, especially at night. Too many stories of people who stopped to help and ended up robbed, or worse. But there was something about him, the way he stood there so calm, like he knew I'd stop, like it was already decided. And maybe it's because I was tired. Maybe it's because I'd been raised to help folks when they needed it. Or maybe it's because some part of me recognized something in the way he stood there, something familiar in a way I couldn't quite place. Whatever the reason, I found my foot hitting the brake. Found myself pulling over onto that gravel shoulder, stones crunching under my tires. He didn't move at first, just stood there, watching me through the passenger window. The dome light came on when I leaned over to unlock the door. And for just a second, I swear to God, I didn't see any shadow stretching out behind him. The headlights were hitting him square on, should have thrown his shadow long across the ground. But there was nothing, just the man, standing alone in the light. I blinked and told myself I was seeing things, too tired. Eyes playing tricks. Need a ride? I called out, though the question seemed stupid. Why else would he be standing there? He nodded, just once. Then he pulled open the door and climbed in. The cold that came in with him, Jesus, it wasn't natural. It was like opening a freezer that had been running for 100 years. My whole truck filled with it in seconds, pushing back the warmth from the heater until my breath started coming out in clouds. He settled into the seat, pulling the door shut with a soft click. And I waited for him to say something. Tell me where he was headed. Thank me for stopping. Anything. He just sat there, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Where you headed? I asked, putting the truck back in drive. My voice sounded too loud in the cab, like I was talking in a church. He turned his head toward me, and I couldn't quite make out his face. The shadows in the truck seemed too dark, pooling in the hollows of his eyes, under his cheekbones. But I felt him looking at me, felt it like a physical weight. Then he nodded again. Once. That same slow, deliberate movement. Forward, I guessed. He wanted to go forward. Fine. I'd take him as far as I was going, drop him off in Durban if he wanted. Just get him where he needed to be and get myself home. I pulled back onto the road, my headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. The yellow line snaked off into the distance, disappearing around another curve. The woods pressed in on both sides, dense and black as pitch. No moon that night, no stars visible through the canopy. We drove in silence. I kept glancing over at him, trying to get a better look at his face, but somehow I never could. The shadows just seemed to cling to him. His hands were folded in his lap. I remember that much. Pale hands, fingers long and thin. They didn't move. He didn't move. Just sat there like a mannequin, staring forward. That's when I noticed the heater had stopped working. The vents were still blowing. I could hear the fan running. But only cold air was coming out now. Ice cold. My breath was fogging up thick in front of my face, and I could see frost starting to form on the inside edges of the windshield, spreading inward like fingers reaching across the glass. Heater's acting up, I said, more to break the silence than anything. I reached down and fiddled with the controls, turning them all the way up, but nothing changed. If anything, it got colder. I could feel it in my chest now, in my lungs, like breathing in December air. The man didn't respond, didn't even seem to notice. I turned my attention back to the road, but the windshield was fogging up fast now. Not just at the edges, across the whole thing, spreading from the inside. I turned on the defrost, cranked it as high as it would go, but it wasn't doing a damn thing. Within a minute, I could barely see the road ahead. Just vague shapes in the fog, the yellow line appearing and disappearing like something glimpsed underwater. Christ, I muttered, leaning forward and trying to wipe the windshield with my sleeve. But the fog was on the inside of the glass, and it was cold, so cold it burned my hand when I touched it. Ice was forming now, actual ice, crystallizing across the windshield in intricate patterns. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. I needed to pull over, needed to stop and figure out what the hell was happening. But we were in the middle of a curve now, nowhere safe to stop, and I couldn't see more than 5 feet ahead. My heart was starting to hammer in my chest. The cold was getting worse, so bad that my fingers were going numb on the steering wheel. That's when I glanced over at the passenger seat. It was empty. I'm not talking about looking away for a second and him being gone when I looked back. I'm talking about turning my head and seeing the seat empty in the same moment. No time for him to have moved. No sound of the door opening. Just empty. The seatbelt hanging loose. The worn fabric of the seat showing the indentations where someone had been sitting, but no one there now. My foot came off the gas automatically. The truck started to slow, engine whining as we coasted forward. I stared at that empty seat, my brain trying to process what I was seeing, trying to make it make sense. "What the?" I started to say. That's when I heard his voice, from the back seat, right behind me. So close I could feel the words against the back of my neck, cold breath that smelled like winter earth and standing water. You should have kept driving. I slammed on the brakes without thinking. The tires locked up, skidding on the asphalt with a sound like a scream. My truck fishtailed, sliding sideways across the road, and for a second I thought we were going over the edge. I could see the guardrail in my peripheral vision, rushing up to meet us. Then the wheels caught, and we jerked to a stop, diagonal across both lanes. I whipped around, looking into the back seat. Nothing. No one. The back seat was empty. But I'd heard him. I knew I'd heard him. That voice had been real, cold and flat and utterly certain. You should have kept driving. My hands were shaking as I reached up and turned on the dome light. The cab of the truck filled with weak yellow light, and I could see everything now. Empty passenger seat. Empty back seat. No one in the truck but me. I was alone. I sat there for a long moment, my heart slamming against my ribs, breath coming fast and shallow. The cold was still there, still present, turning my breath to fog. The heater was still blowing ice-cold air. And the windshield was completely frosted over now, thick white frost covering the entire surface from the inside, blocking out the night. I couldn't see the road, couldn't see the trees, couldn't see anything but that white frozen surface. And then, as I watched, something appeared in the frost. A handprint. 5 long fingers, pressed against the glass from the inside, from where I was sitting. Except my hands were on my lap now, nowhere near the windshield. I watched, frozen with a terror I'd never felt before, as those fingers began to move. They dragged downward, slowly, leaving clear trails through the frost. 5 parallel lines, scraping down the glass with a sound like fingernails on ice. Down, 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 until they reached the bottom of the windshield. Then they were gone. The handprint faded, melting back into the frost. But those lines remained, 5 clear streaks through the white, like something had tried to claw its way out. Or in. I don't remember deciding to move. Don't remember putting the truck in drive or hitting the gas. But suddenly I was moving, tires squealing as I straightened out and accelerated down the road. I didn't care about the frost on the windshield, didn't care that I could barely see. I just needed to get away from that spot, from whatever had been in my truck. The frost started to clear as I drove, slowly at first, then faster, melting away until I could see the road again. The heater kicked back on, real heat this time, blessed warmth flooding the cab. By the time I reached Durban, everything seemed normal again. The temperature gauge was in the right place. The defrost was working. It was just my truck, just me, driving home on a cold November night. But I knew what I'd experienced, knew what I'd heard. I pulled into a gas station at the edge of town, my hands still shaking. Sat there in the parking lot with the engine running, just breathing, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, that I'd been tired, that my mind had played tricks on me. But when I looked down at the passenger seat, I could still see the indentations in the fabric, could still smell that scent, wet earth and dark water and something else, something old. I got out and walked around to the passenger side, opened the door, and looked at the seat in the harsh fluorescent light from the gas station. And there, on the floor mat, I found it, a single leaf, broad and brown, curled at the edges. But when I picked it up, it crumbled in my hand, turned to dust like it had been dead for 100 years. I drove the rest of the way home with all the windows down, despite the cold. Needed the fresh air, needed to feel something real. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the truck for a long time before I could make myself go inside. I asked around town after that, casual-like, not wanting to sound crazy. Asked if anyone had gone missing on Route 219. if there'd been any accidents around that curve near Cheat Mountain. Old Eddie at the general store got quiet when I asked. Said there'd been stories about that stretch of road for as long as he could remember. People who stopped to help hitchhikers who weren't there. Drivers who picked up passengers that vanished before reaching town. He said the old-timers believed it was the mountain itself, that the curves and the darkness and the isolation, that it did something to people, trapped them somehow in the space between where they were and where they were going, left them walking those roads forever, trying to find their way home. I don't know if I believe that. Don't know what I believe anymore, to be honest. But I know what I saw, what I heard, the handprint on the frost, dragging downward like a warning. You should have kept driving. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that hitchhiker. About his face I could never quite see. His shadow that wasn't there. I think about how calm he was, how patient, like he'd been waiting at that curve for a long, long time. And I wonder if he's still there. Standing by the roadside, thumb out, waiting for the next tired driver to come around that bend. Waiting for someone else to make the same mistake I did. I take the long way home now. Add an extra 30 minutes to my drive. Go around through Slatty Fork instead. People at work think I'm crazy, wasting gas like that. But I don't care. Because sometimes when I'm driving these mountain roads late at night, when the darkness presses in close and the curves seem to go on forever, I can still feel it. That cold, that presence, like something sitting in the passenger seat, just outside my peripheral vision. Waiting. And I swear to God, sometimes I catch a glimpse in my rearview mirror. Just for a second, so quick I could almost convince myself I imagined it. A pale hand, long fingers, resting on the back of my seat, right behind me. I was driving through the Blue Ridge that night because I had to, not because I wanted to. My sister had called me from Boone, her voice thin and shaking, saying she needed me there by morning. I didn't ask why over the phone. You don't ask those kinds of questions when someone sounds like that. So I threw a bag in the trunk and headed out around 9, knowing I'd be driving most of the night through mountain roads I hadn't traveled in years. The storm hit around 11, not the kind that builds gradually, giving you warning. This one just opened up all at once, like someone had torn a hole in the sky. The rain came down so hard my wipers couldn't keep up, even on the highest setting. I had to slow to maybe 30 miles an hour, leaning forward over the steering wheel, trying to make out the yellow lines through the sheets of water. That's when my fuel light came on. I'd meant to fill up before leaving the interstate, but I'd been so focused on making good time that I'd talked myself into pushing through. Now I was somewhere between Asheville and Boone, on a 2-lane highway that wound through nothing but forest, and my tank was near empty. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. These mountains swallow cell service whole. I kept driving, watching the gas gauge needle hover just above E, my chest getting tighter with each passing mile. The rain hammered down, and the darkness between the trees felt absolute, like the forest went on forever in all directions. I started doing the math in my head, trying to remember how far you could drive on fumes, wondering if I'd have to just pull over and wait until morning to flag someone down. Then I saw it, a glow through the rain, faint and yellowish. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a gas station, sitting back from the road like it had been there since before the highway was paved. The building was small, maybe the size of a single-car garage, with white paint peeling off the cinder blocks. Above the door, a hand-painted sign said, Earls, in faded red letters. One light hung over the pump island, swaying slightly in the wind, casting everything in a sick, jaundiced glow. I pulled in, relief flooding through me despite the eeriness of the place. It didn't matter that it looked abandoned. Didn't matter that I couldn't see another building or house anywhere nearby. It had gas, and that's what I needed. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, rain drumming on the roof. Through the station's window, I could see a figure sitting behind the counter. The glass was thick, maybe bulletproof, the kind you see in bad neighborhoods in cities, not out here in the middle of nowhere. The figure wasn't moving, just sitting there in the yellowish light. I grabbed my wallet and made a run for it, getting soaked in the 3 seconds it took to reach the overhang above the pumps. I waved at the window as I approached, trying to catch the clerk's attention, but he didn't move. Didn't even turn his head. Up close, I could see him better through the glass. He was older, maybe in his 70s, wearing a plaid shirt that had probably been red once, but had faded to a rust color. His face was deeply lined, shadowed in the poor light, and his eyes seemed to be staring at something on the counter in front of him. For a second I wondered if he was asleep, or maybe sick. There was a small speaker built into the glass, and I leaned toward it. "Evening," I said. "Need to fill up." Nothing. He didn't move at all. I couldn't even tell if he was breathing. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through my shirt. I knocked on the glass, harder than I probably should have. "Hello, sir?" Still nothing. But then I noticed the pump meters behind me had lit up, their old mechanical numbers reading all zeros. I glanced back at the man. He still hadn't moved, but somehow the pumps were on. I told myself he'd pressed a button, that I just hadn't seen it. Told myself a lot of things, actually, as I walked back to my car and unscrewed the gas cap. The pump handle was cold and slick with rain. I squeezed the trigger, and gas started flowing with that familiar gurgling sound. I watched the numbers tick upward on the pump, gallons and dollars spinning on the old mechanical dial. Something wasn't right about them, though. The dollars were climbing faster than the gallons, way faster. By the time I'd pumped what should have been maybe 10 gallons, the dollar amount read $38. I stopped pumping and stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of it. Behind me, the station lights flickered. I turned to look at the building. The old man was still sitting there, motionless. The light above his head buzzed and dimmed, then came back. The whole place looked less real somehow in that moment, like a photograph that was starting to fade. I should have left then. Should have gotten in my car and driven off, even if it meant running out of gas a mile down the road. But I didn't. Instead, I put the nozzle back on the pump and walked toward that window again, pulling 220s from my wallet. There was a small metal drawer under the speaker, the kind that slides through the glass. I pulled it toward me. It moved smoothly, well-oiled, and placed the $40 inside, then pushed it back through. "Keep the change," I said, though I knew the numbers were wrong, knew something was deeply off about this whole place. The drawer disappeared into the slot. I waited for it to come back with my change, or for the old man to move, to acknowledge me somehow. But he just sat there, and now I realized I couldn't see his chest rising and falling, couldn't see any sign of life at all. "Thank you," I said quietly, and turned away. That's when the lights went out. Not just the light above the pumps, but everything. The station, the sign, all of it, like someone had thrown a master switch. The only sound was the rain, millions of drops hitting the concrete, the overhang, my car, the building. That and my own breathing, suddenly loud in my ears. I fumbled for my phone, got it out and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating sheets of rain and my car, sitting there with the driver's door still open. I could see my breath now, even though it hadn't been that cold before. The temperature had dropped, I realized. Dropped fast. I started toward my car, my shoes splashing through puddles, the rain soaking my hair and running down my face. I just wanted to get inside, to lock the doors and get the hell out of here, sister or no sister. Then the intercom crackled to life. It was just static at first, loud and harsh, cutting through the rain. I froze, one hand on my car door, looking back at the darkened station. The intercom crackled again, and then I heard it. A voice, barely a whisper, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Don't leave yet." The words seemed to hang in the air, mixing with the rain. It was a man's voice, old and dry, like wind through dead leaves. Not a request. More like a warning, or maybe an order. My hand was shaking as I pulled open the car door. The interior light came on, and in that moment I felt hideously exposed, like I was standing on a stage. I threw myself into the driver's seat and yanked the door shut, hitting the lock button immediately. The pump clicked off behind me. I hadn't touched it, hadn't gone back to it. But I heard it as clear as anything. That mechanical click that means the tank is full and the pump has automatically shut off. I looked in my rearview mirror, my phone light still on, angling around the interior. I could see the pump through the rain-streaked back window, hanging on its cradle where I'd left it. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. There were footprints on the concrete. Wet footprints leading away from my car. I grabbed my phone and held it up, trying to see better. The footprints were fresh, water still pooling in each impression. They led from the driver's side of my car, where I'd been standing when I filled up, across the concrete, and toward the edge of the light, toward the woods. My footprints. I could tell by the tread pattern, the size. But I was in my car. I hadn't walked over there, hadn't gone anywhere near the woods. I watched those footprints, my breath coming fast and shallow, fog building on the inside of my windshield. The rain was washing them away slowly, but I could still see them, still see where they went. They didn't stop at the tree line. They went into the darkness, into the forest, like whoever made them had just kept walking into the night. I reached for the ignition, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get the key in. The engine turned over once, twice, and died. I tried again. Nothing. Not even a click. "No, no, no, no," I heard myself saying, turning the key again and again. The car was completely dead. Even the interior light had gone out. My phone was the only source of light now, and even that seemed dimmer than it should be. I looked up at the rearview mirror again, and my heart stopped. There was someone standing behind my car, just a dark shape, barely visible in the rain, but definitely human-shaped. Tall and thin, perfectly still, watching me. I spun around in my seat, phone light pointed at the back window, but there was nothing there. Just rain and darkness. I whipped back around to the mirror, empty. Nothing but the pump and the dark woods beyond. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump so hard I nearly dropped it. For a second I just stared at it, not understanding. I had a signal. Somehow, in this dead zone, I had a single bar of service. A text message had come through. From my sister. "Where are you?" Getting worried. I tried to call her, my fingers fumbling with the screen. It rang once, then cut to a busy signal. I tried again. Same thing. I sent a text back. "Car died. Gas station. Blue Ridge. Help." The message failed to send. I watched the little circle spin. Then the red exclamation mark appeared. I tried again. Same result. I looked at the signal indicator. 0 bars now, like it had only been there long enough to let that one message through. A tapping sound made me look up. Something was hitting the driver's side window. Not the rain. This was rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I shined my phone light at the window but couldn't see anything. The rain was too heavy, the glass too fogged. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Then I saw it, a handprint appearing on the outside of the glass, not being made, just appearing. Like condensation forming in reverse. A full handprint, fingers spread, right at eye level. I screamed and threw myself toward the passenger side, my phone flying from my hand and landing somewhere in the footwell. The car was pitch black now. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and panicked, and the rain, always the rain, and that tapping, still going. Tap, tap, tap. I felt around frantically for my phone, my hands brushing old receipts and spare change. My fingers finally closed around it, and I brought it up, turning the light toward the driver's window. The handprint was gone, but now there was a face pressed against the glass. Not a face I could describe properly. The details were all wrong, like a photograph that had been left in water and had started to blur and run. But it was looking at me. Looking right at me with eyes that were too wide, too dark. Then it smiled, and its mouth was all wrong too. Too wide, stretching up toward where its ears should be. I must have blacked out or something, because the next thing I remember, I was screaming and pounding on the horn, even though the car was dead and the horn shouldn't have worked. But it did. It blared out into the night, again and again, as I slammed my palm against it. Light flooded everything. The station lights came back on, the sign, the pump. The old man was standing now, right at the window, one hand raised like he was waving at me. His face looked concerned, normal, human. My car started. I hadn't touched the ignition, but the engine turned over and caught, rumbling to life. I didn't think. I just slammed it into drive and floored it, spraying water as I fishtailed out of that parking lot and onto the highway. I watched the gas station shrink in my rearview mirror, the yellow light getting smaller and smaller until a curve in the road took it from view. I drove for 20 minutes before I could breathe properly again. When I finally did stop, at a well-lit truck stop with a dozen other cars in the lot, I sat in my car shaking for a long time before I could make myself go inside. I never told my sister why I was 3 hours late getting to Boone, and I've never driven that stretch of highway again. I take the long way now, even though it adds an hour to the trip. But sometimes late at night, I'll look at my shoes, the ones I was wearing that night. I've tried to throw them away twice, but somehow they always end up back in my closet. And on rainy nights, when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep, I can swear I see wet footprints on my bedroom floor. My footprints leading from my bed to the door, leading to somewhere I never went.